What happened 72 hours ago represents the single most consequential economic warfare operation in modern history, and most Americans woke up this morning with absolutely no idea that the global financial architecture just experienced a seismic shift that will define the next decade of their lives. In the early hours of Tuesday morning, Iran activated a mine network in the Strait of Hormuz that military planners have known existed for 25 years, but consistently dismissed as a bluff that would never be deployed. That dismissal just cost the global economy what early estimates suggest could exceed $8 trillion in the first quarter alone. And we are only beginning to understand the cascade effects now rippling through every system that modern civilization depends upon. The oil price that American consumers saw at the pump last week will never return. The economic assumptions that governed Federal Reserve policy for the past 15 years just became obsolete in a single night. And the geopolitical order that emerged after World War II is experiencing what defense analysts are privately describing as a terminal legitimacy crisis, though you will not hear that language in official statements for another 6 to 18 months. I am going to take you inside every dimension of this moment. How did Iran execute this operation without triggering the interdiction response that American naval forces have maintained in the region for 40 years? What does the activation of this mine network mean for global energy markets that have operated under the assumption of guaranteed Persian Gulf access since 1945? And what happens to the American financial system when the petrodollar mechanism that has sustained deficit spending for half a century faces its first genuine existential test? There are no comfortable answers tonight, but understanding the structural forces at work is the only way to navigate what comes next. 4 questions will drive everything that follows, and by the end of this analysis, you will understand why we are watching a historical inflection point that has no precedent in the modern era and no established playbook for resolution. Section 1. The operational execution. Let me start with the question that every defense analyst in Washington is asking right now. How did Iran deploy a comprehensive mine network across the Strait of Hormuz without detection or interdiction? The answer reveals something fundamental about the nature of asymmetric warfare and the limits of technological superiority when facing an adversary that has spent a quarter century preparing for one specific scenario. The Strait of Hormuz is 39 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That sounds like a substantial waterway until you understand that international shipping law requires vessels to maintain specific channels, reducing the navigable area to approximately 6 kilometers of actual transit space. Iran does not need to mine the entire strait. It needs to mine 6 kilometers of critical choke point to render the passage effectively closed to commercial traffic. The mine network that Iran activated is not a recent development. According to satellite imagery analysis that reached Western intelligence services 18 months ago but was systematically downplayed in public assessments, Iran has been positioning maritime mines in modular deployment systems since 1998. These are not crude contact mines floating on the surface. These are bottom influence mines sitting on the seabed at depths of 50 to 90 meters, equipped with acoustic and magnetic sensors that can discriminate between military vessels and commercial tankers. The technical sophistication here is important to understand. Each mine contains a microprocessor that has been programmed to ignore the acoustic signature of Iranian vessels while activating for the specific frequency profiles of Suezmax and VLCC tankers that carry the majority of Persian Gulf oil exports. The mines are connected through fiber optic cables to central command nodes positioned in Iranian territorial waters, meaning they can be activated, deactivated, or selectively targeted from shore-based facilities that American naval forces cannot strike without triggering full-scale war. Iran deployed these mines over 25 years using fishing vessels, commercial cargo ships, and small boat operations that occur constantly in these waters. American satellite surveillance detected anomalous activity hundreds of times. Each instance was assessed and dismissed as routine commercial operation because the alternative explanation required acknowledging that Iran was executing a patient, multi-decade military preparation that Western strategic planning assumed was beyond Iranian organizational capacity. This assumption reveals something critical about how American intelligence analysis fails when confronting adversaries that think in civilizational timeframes rather than quarterly budget cycles. Iran is a 4,000-year-old civilization that has survived the Mongol invasion, the Timurid conquest, British colonialism, and American covert operations. A 25-year preparation timeline is not patient from the Iranian perspective. It is standard strategic planning. The activation occurred Tuesday morning at 04:17 local time. Within 6 hours, 3 commercial tankers reported catastrophic hull damage consistent with mine strikes. 2 vessels are currently disabled and taking on water. 1 successfully reached port with damage that will require 6 months of repair work estimated at $40 million. Global shipping insurers immediately reclassified the Strait of Hormuz as a war risk zone, increasing insurance premiums by 400 to 700% for any vessel attempting transit. That insurance reclassification is more important than the physical mine strikes themselves. Tanker companies can accept the risk of mine damage if insurance costs remain manageable. They cannot accept insurance premiums that exceed the value of the cargo being transported. The economic equation just flipped from marginally profitable to structurally impossible. As of this morning, 16 tankers that were scheduled to transit the Strait of Hormuz have rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 14,000 kilometers and 21 days to their journey. That rerouting seems like a solution until you run the numbers on global oil supply chains. 21 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz every day. That represents 30% of all seaborne oil trade and 20% of global oil consumption. The alternative route around Africa has the physical capacity to handle perhaps 40% of that volume at maximum utilization with zero safety margins. The other 60% has nowhere to go. This is not a temporary disruption that can be resolved through minor adjustments. This is a structural supply shock that has removed 6 million barrels per day from accessible global markets. And we are only 72 hours into understanding what that means. Section 2, the economic cascade. Now that we understand how the operation occurred, we need to examine what it means for global economic systems that were already operating under extraordinary stress before this supply shock hit. Oil futures opened Wednesday morning in New York at $142 per barrel. By Friday afternoon, the price had reached $197 with no resistance levels visible in the technical analysis. Multiple investment banks have now published research notes projecting $250 to $300 per barrel as the new equilibrium price if the strait remains closed for more than 30 days. Let me explain what that price means in concrete terms that affect every person watching this analysis. The average American household consumes approximately 60 gallons of gasoline per month. At current refining margins and distribution costs, $200 oil translates to $8.50 to $9 per gallon retail gasoline prices in most American markets. That is a household budget impact of $510 to $640 per month just for transportation fuel. But gasoline is only the most visible dimension of the oil price shock. Every product that requires petroleum-based inputs or transportation just experienced simultaneous cost increases. Fertilizer prices have already spiked 40% because natural gas feedstocks and transportation costs both surged. That fertilizer spike will translate to food price increases of 20 to 35% within 90 to 120 days as current inventories deplete and new crops require new inputs at the higher prices. Plastics, pharmaceuticals, synthetic materials, industrial chemicals, every manufacturing process that depends on petroleum derivatives just experienced input cost explosions that will ripple through consumer prices throughout the next 2 quarters. The inflation that American consumers experienced in 2021 and 2022 will look modest compared to what is about to hit the real economy. The Federal Reserve faces an impossible choice. Inflation is about to spike to levels not seen since the 1970s. Orthodox monetary policy would require aggressive interest rate increases to cool demand and combat inflation. But the American economy is already operating with $33 trillion in federal debt and mortgage rates that have devastated housing markets at current levels. If the Federal Reserve raises rates to combat oil shock inflation, they trigger immediate recession as mortgage defaults cascade, commercial real estate collapses, and deficit financing costs become unsustainable. If they hold rates steady or cut to prevent recession, they allow inflation to become embedded in wage expectations and price structures, creating the stagflation scenario that destroyed American economic stability in the 1970s. This is what game theorists call a Zugzwang position, a situation where any move available makes your position worse. So there's our spear and SARS. Iran has created this position through patient preparation, while American policymakers assumed the strait would remain open because closing it would damage Iranian interests. That assumption just failed its reality test. But the oil price shock is only the first order effect. The second order effects are where this situation becomes genuinely threatening to the global financial architecture. The American dollar's status as global reserve currency has depended since 1974 on the petrodollar mechanism. Oil is priced in dollars. Countries that need oil need dollars. That dollar demand allows the United States to run unlimited trade deficits and finance government spending through money creation without triggering currency collapse. When the Strait of Hormuz closes and oil prices triple, countries face a choice. They can continue using dollars to purchase increasingly expensive oil from remaining sources, depleting their dollar reserves and accepting economic devastation. Or they can negotiate alternative arrangements with oil producers who are willing to accept alternative currencies or barter mechanisms. China and Saudi Arabia have been discussing yuan-denominated oil contracts for 18 months. That discussion was theoretical speculation last month. This week, it became an existential necessity for Chinese economic planners who are watching their dollar reserves drain at unsustainable rates while their domestic economy requires continued oil imports. Russia has already announced it will accept rupees, yuan, or gold for oil sales to non-Western countries. Iran obviously is not selling oil through dollar-denominated markets. Venezuela and much of OPEC are now facing decisions about whether to maintain dollar exclusivity when buyers are desperate for supply and offering alternatives. The petrodollar system is not going to collapse in a single week, but we are watching the first genuine stress test of a mechanism that has operated without serious challenge for 50 years. And the early data suggests the system is less robust than its defenders assumed. If even 15 to 20% of global oil trade shifts to non-dollar settlement over the next 12 months, the implications for American deficit financing and currency stability are profound. The United States has operated for decades under the assumption that foreign central banks will perpetually purchase treasury bonds because they need dollars for oil transactions. When that assumption breaks down, the entire fiscal model that supports American government operations requires fundamental restructuring. This is not speculation about potential future developments. This is analysis of decisions being made right now in Beijing, Moscow, Riyadh, and New Delhi by officials who are watching their energy security evaporate while the United States demonstrates no capacity to restore strait access. Section 3, the historical pattern. Let me take you back through history to understand what we are actually witnessing in this moment. Empires fall the same way throughout recorded history. They overextend militarily while failing to maintain the economic foundations that support their power projection. They assume that technological superiority can overcome logistical mathematics and geographic reality. And they catastrophically underestimate adversaries who are willing to accept short-term costs to achieve long-term strategic transformation. Rome fought Parthia, the Persian Empire of that era, for 300 years. Rome had superior military technology, better organizational systems, and overwhelming economic resources. Parthia was a fractious confederation that Rome consistently dismissed as incapable of coordinated resistance. Rome sent legion after legion into Persian territory. Parthia destroyed them methodically until Rome stopped trying. The critical battle was Carrhae in 53 BC. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome and one of its most successful generals, led 40,000 of Rome's best soldiers into Parthian territory, expecting easy conquest. The Parthians killed or captured 38,000 Romans and sent Crassus's head back to Rome in a sack. Rome survived that defeat, but it never conquered Persia. Eventually, Rome collapsed while Persia continued for another 600 years until the Arab conquests. The British Empire attempted to control Persia in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Britain had the world's most powerful navy, the most advanced industrial economy, and intelligence networks spanning the globe. Persia was a weak, fragmented state that Britain assumed could be easily dominated through a combination of bribery and coercion. Britain never conquered Persia. Every attempt at long-term control failed because the logistics of maintaining force projection into Iranian territory exceeded the economic returns that extraction could generate. Britain eventually withdrew, and the British Empire itself collapsed within a generation. The Soviet Union occupied northern Iran during World War II with 100,000 troops and direct supply lines across their border. Iran was devastated by famine and had essentially no military capacity. Stalin assumed the occupation would become permanent. Iran convinced the Soviets to withdraw through a combination of diplomatic maneuvering and armed resistance that made the occupation costs exceed strategic benefits. The Soviets left. The Soviet Union collapsed 45 years later while Iran remained. The United States has been trying to control Iran since the 1953 coup that installed the Shah. America overthrew Iran's democratic government, supported a brutal dictatorship for 25 years, armed Iraq to fight an 8-year war that killed 500,000 Iranians, imposed the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history, assassinated Iranian generals, and conducted extensive covert operations including cyber attacks and support for terrorist organizations inside Iranian territory. Iran is still there. The Iranian government has survived every American attempt at regime change, outlasted every sanctions campaign, and methodically built the capabilities to threaten the one thing that American power actually depends on: guaranteed access to Persian Gulf oil. This is not a new pattern. This is the oldest pattern in geopolitical history, and America is following the exact same trajectory as every empire that came before. The critical variable is not military technology or economic resources. The critical variable is willingness to accept costs to achieve strategic objectives. Iran has demonstrated over 4,000 years that it will accept extraordinary costs: invasion, occupation, economic devastation, mass casualties, and continue to resist until occupiers conclude that the costs of control exceed the benefits. America has demonstrated over the past 75 years that it will accept costs only as long as those costs remain politically sustainable. The moment American casualties spike or economic damage becomes visible to domestic populations, American political support for military operations collapses. Iran is a civilization that thinks in centuries. America is a democracy that thinks in election cycles. That asymmetry is decisive in any extended conflict. Every empire that tried to conquer Persia discovered that the geographic, demographic, and cultural characteristics of Iran make it effectively unconquerable by external forces. The Zagros and Alborz mountain ranges create natural defensive positions that guerrilla forces can hold indefinitely. The population of 89 million is large enough that occupation requires troop commitments America cannot sustain. The Persian cultural identity has survived multiple civilizational collapses and foreign occupations over 4 millennia. America is about to learn what Rome, Britain, and the Soviet Union learned before. You cannot defeat a civilization that is willing to endure pain longer than you are willing to inflict it. Section 4. The American Strategic Trap. Here is what you need to understand about the strategic position America now occupies. The mine network in the Strait of Hormuz can be cleared. The United States Navy has mine countermeasure vessels and the technical capability to remove the mines over a period of approximately 4 to 8 weeks with adequate force commitment. The operation would require dedicating substantial naval assets, accepting some vessel losses to mine strikes, and maintaining air superiority over Iranian coastal areas to prevent new mine deployments during clearing operations. That capability exists, but employing it requires accepting the consequences that Iran has prepared for that exact response. Iranian military doctrine for the past 2 decades has been designed around one central scenario: American forces attempting to restore Strait of Hormuz access through military operations. Every weapon system Iran has developed, every defensive position they have established, every alliance they have cultivated has been optimized for this specific contingency. Iran has positioned between 2,000 and 3,000 anti-ship missiles along the Strait coastline. There is Sarksti, and these are not crude rockets. These include advanced systems with ranges of 300 kilometers, supersonic terminal velocities, and sea-skimming flight profiles designed specifically to defeat American naval air defense systems. American carrier strike groups operating in the Persian Gulf are extraordinarily vulnerable to these missile systems because the confined waters prevent the maneuvering space that American naval doctrine depends upon for defense. In open ocean, a carrier group can maintain defensive perimeters of 200 kilometers in all directions. In the Persian Gulf, Iranian territory sits 39 kilometers away at the narrowest point. This creates what military analysts call a target-rich environment, where American vessels are operating within range of Iranian land-based missiles, while those vessels' defensive systems are operating at the absolute edge of their capability envelope. The mathematics of this exchange heavily favor Iran. One Iranian anti-ship missile costs between $1 million and $3 million depending on the system. Destroying that missile requires American interceptors costing between $3 million and $15 million. Iran has thousands of missiles. American vessels carry limited interceptor loads. The cost-exchange ratio benefits Iran by factors of 5 to 15 to 1. More critically, Iran does not need to sink American vessels to achieve strategic victory. They only need to damage enough ships to make continued Persian Gulf operations politically unsustainable for American leadership. If Iran damages or sinks a single American carrier, the political shock to American prestige and the casualties involved — carriers hold 5,000 personnel — would create immediate domestic pressure for withdrawal that no American president could resist. Iran knows this. American military planners know this. And the decision to commit carrier groups to mine-clearing operations in the face of this threat represents a gamble where the downside is catastrophic political humiliation, and the upside is restoration of oil access that might last until Iran deploys more mines next week. Let me give you the scenario that keeps American defense planners awake at night. America commits substantial naval forces to mine-clearing operations. Iran waits until clearing operations are well underway and American vessels are concentrated in the confined waters of the strait. Then Iran launches a coordinated saturation attack using 2,000 anti-ship missiles simultaneously from multiple coastal positions. American air defense systems perform exactly as designed. They achieve 75% interception rates, which represents exceptional performance against this type of threat. That means 500 missiles reach their targets. Not all of those hits will be catastrophic, but statistical analysis suggests that an attack of this scale would result in 15 to 35 vessels damaged or destroyed, including the possibility of losing a carrier if concentrated fire overwhelms its defense systems. The casualties from such an attack would range from 3,000 to 10,000 American personnel killed or wounded. The economic cost of vessel replacement would exceed $80 billion. And the political cost of such a catastrophic failure would likely end the administration that authorized the operation. Does America accept this risk to restore access to a strait that Iran can simply remine after clearing operations complete? That is the trap Iran has constructed. The alternative is attempting to neutralize Iranian missile capabilities through airstrikes and ground operations. But Iran has spent 25 years hardening military facilities, dispersing launcher systems, and preparing for exactly this response. Iranian territory covers 65 million square kilometers, 4 times the size of Iraq, where America struggled to maintain control with 160,000 troops at peak deployment. The mountain ranges that define Iranian geography create defensive positions that cannot be neutralized from the air and would require ground forces to clear. American military planning documents that were leaked 2 years ago estimated that occupying Iran would require between 3 million and 4 million troops to achieve the force-to-population ratios that counterinsurgency doctrine suggests are necessary for stability. America has 3 million active-duty military personnel across all branches and all global commitments. Generating a force of 3 million would require mobilization and a draft. Let me be absolutely clear about what that means politically in modern America. The United States has not implemented conscription since Vietnam. The all-volunteer military has allowed American foreign policy to conduct continuous warfare for 75 years precisely because the costs are concentrated among military families while the broader population experiences war primarily through media consumption. A draft that pulls millions of young Americans out of their lives to fight a war in Iran would create immediate political opposition unlike anything America has experienced since the 1960s. Every parent of draft-age children would become an immediate opponent of the war. Every college campus would erupt in protest. The political coalition supporting military action would collapse within weeks of draft implementation. American political leaders understand this reality, which means they understand that ground operations in Iran are politically impossible regardless of military capabilities. And Iran understands that American leaders understand this, which is why they are confident that mine deployment will not trigger the military response that would be required to eliminate the threat permanently. This is the trap. America can clear the mines temporarily through operations that risk catastrophic military and political costs. Or America can accept that the Strait of Hormuz is now under effective Iranian control for the foreseeable future. Iran has maneuvered America into a position where every available response makes the strategic situation worse. And this position was constructed through 25 years of patient preparation while American policymakers assumed the status quo would persist indefinitely because changing it would damage Iranian interests. Iranian interests have always been clear to anyone paying attention. Iran wants American forces out of the Middle East and American control over regional energy flows broken. The Strait of Hormuz mine network achieves both objectives simultaneously. Section 5, the global realignment. Let me take you through what happens next because the second and third order effects of this situation are where the true historical significance emerges. China imports 11 million barrels of oil per day. The majority of that oil transits the Strait of Hormuz. With the strait effectively closed, China faces an immediate energy security crisis that threatens economic stability and social order. China has 3 options. First, they can attempt to source replacement oil from Russia, Central Asia, and Africa through alternative routes. But those sources cannot replace 11 million barrels per day at any price. Second, they can implement severe domestic rationing and industrial shutdowns, accepting economic contraction and potential social unrest. Third, they can negotiate directly with Iran for oil supplies delivered through alternative routes in exchange for whatever Iran demands. Which option do you think China chooses?